All right, so welcome into the first edition of Carp's Corner. Going to do a lot of great things here on OutKick. Pretty excited to launch this deal. Going to start doing a live stream and even expand this thing even more. Start to have some guests on and do some awesome stuff. But wanted to get out there this week. There's a lot of things that need to be talked about, especially in Big Ten country, especially in Buckeye Nation. When you lose a game at Ohio State, it feels like a funeral. I always joke around and say there's no funerals in football because the sun comes up the next day. You're not burying anything. You are going to play more games, but that doesn't necessarily mean, and they're not going to cancel the season, but that doesn't necessarily mean there aren't changes. There aren't things that need to be fixed. And one of the great things about college football is the passion that the fan bases show. Everybody loves it. To get gassed up. You come up on Saturday. It's an all-day affair. Everybody is so pumped to be back in the stands this year, and they're really, really excited for it. And I'm excited to watch it. I'm excited to be a part of it, man. This is a absolutely tremendous opportunity. And with that passion, comes disappointment. If you love something, you can be heartbroken at times. And Ohio State has not lost a regular season game in the last 2 years. Now, albeit, last year was an abbreviated season. And so, not quite as many games to play during the regular season, but the last two losses have been to Alabama and to Clemson, and they beat Clemson last year. So, when you look at this holistically, you feel pretty good about yourself. You're always somebody who's going to be invited to the party. And so I want to dive into that. And then the USC firing of Clay Helton, potential rumors out there of who could be circulating, who could potentially be the next head coach at USC. Because when you start to fire coaches in season, you're essentially punting on the year. You're essentially saying, hey, you know what? We're done with this. We wanted to probably fire Clay Helton last year. We didn't do it, but we're moving on. We'll get to that in a minute. Back to Ohio State and back to really the Big Ten in general. Big Ten had a great weekend. Iowa beats Iowa State. Penn State, looks good in their win over Ball State. Michigan beats Washington, albeit, Washington team that was beat up and wasn't playing real well, but a big day for the Big Ten. And usually Ohio State's the one carrying the water. Well, unfortunately, they're very disappointing. They play against Oregon, and it's a game they never really felt like they had control over. And Ryan Day even said as much, his post-game presser, is the fact that during that game, it's like I never really felt like we had control of it because I never felt like we could really establish the run and run it whenever we needed to. And when that's the case, the head coach and signal caller, it's difficult to essentially come out there and call a game because when it's 4th and 2, you're sometimes throwing, and getting that taken care of instead of running the football, which is something that has been a staple of Ohio State for so many years. And so let's look at some of the issues. It's 42, 42-28. You lose a game by a couple scores. You don't feel great about it. We'll start with some of the issues here offensively that nobody really wants to talk about because the offense rolled up 600 yards. I go back to this, and I've been hammering over and over. Offense put up 600 yards. Very productive day from that standpoint. However, there are some issues. I don't think anybody coming to this game thought an Ohio State team would be held by an Oregon defense to under 35 points. That seemed like a given. Scored 35 points. It felt like that'd usually be enough to win this game, but this offense has been so good under Ryan Day for the last 3 years, 2 as a head coach, 1 as a coordinator, that it seemed like, 40 points was almost a given. But then again, you had Dwayne Haskins and Justin Fields, a pair of first-round draft picks who, Justin was younger. Dwayne hadn't really played much, but was a little bit more experienced in the system. And now you're breaking in CJ Stroud, who had never thrown a college pass before. And so there is a learning curve that's going to happen. CJ is very talented. He's got a gifted arm, not the runner that obviously Justin was. And Justin's legs, he didn't really choose to run with them all that much, but he always had that weapon there when he needed it. And that's a great friend of a quarterback. It's a great friend of a head coach because you can run those zone reads, you can run boots, and even when the play breaks down, you can rely on your quarterback to go out there and get you yards. So you don't necessarily have that safety net anymore. And with that, you're playing 4 offensive tackles up front. You can really mash people that way. They're great in protection. There hasn't been a lot of misdirection in the Ohio State run game, and that's something that really has kind of been a staple for it over the last, 3-4 years. They're big, they're physical, they maul you up front. But you watch, Oregon play, there's a little more misdirection, there's a little more movement, which causes some confusion. And sometimes, when you're struggling a little bit to run, a little confusion on the defensive side of the football can help. And so, you have those issues there, 2 of 5 on 4th down. So, that plays into the 600 yards of offense, but only 28 points. Bill Parcells saying every 100 yards you have should have 7 points. So that should equate to 42. It's a magic number right there that would have helped things a lot, because that means either you're turning the football over, you're not good in the red zone, you have a lot of penalties that are taken away, or you have bad field position, or you're bad on third down. So Ohio State only the one interception. Okay, not terrible. 2 for 5 on fourth down. That's where it comes back to bite you, because those are opportunities where you're inside the 40. You're thinking about getting points, but it's essentially the equivalent of throwing an interception. It's a turnover on downs. They get the ball right there, or it's a fumble, whatever it might be. Those it's not winning football, and so those are essentially 3 more turnovers that you have to factor in. I have full confidence Ryan Day will be able to get this offense fixed. Was never really able to turn the tide fully in the game, but I kept waiting for it. And I think everybody, in Buckeye Nation, really probably around the country, looking at this, like, they have full confidence in Ryan Day and what he's able to do with his offense. You have elite receivers, an elite running back, a really strong offensive line, a young quarterback that you've got to kind of work with a little bit, but you're not ready to throw the baby out with the bathwater, and you can work through some of these processes. I watched 2014 Virginia Tech in person. Offense struggled mightily, struggled probably as much as the defense did against Oregon, which we'll get to in a minute. But before that, they had elite talent. Michael Thomas, you've got Ezekiel Elliott, all these great players out there, and they couldn't pick up a yard, couldn't hardly do anything at points during that game. And Virginia Tech ran the same thing over and over again on defense. They weren't able to adjust. Ryan Day was able to adjust. They just weren't able to kind of kick it into high gear when they needed to in the second half offensively the last couple of drives. And he kind of admitted it as much. Now, defensively, this is where a lot of the big problems lied. And this is where a lot of those problems began to rear up. And there were some of these issues that you saw last year. Everyone wants to, look at Alabama and pull back from that game and draw from those experiences. Alabama was an incredibly gifted football team, 2 first-round receivers, an elite first-round quarterback. They were the best team in college football, clearly. And probably, if you look at it, maybe Nick Saban's best overall. Very, very skilled. So I'm going to throw away a lot of the things I saw in that, because people get upset about the mismatches, linebackers on Devonta Smith, and all these different things. It was a COVID year. They had a lot of guys out, and so the coaches were kind of handicapped. This year, not the case. And so how do they solve some of these problems? We'll start up front. We'll work through all 3 levels of the defense. We'll start with the defensive line, because everybody just wants to dump this at the feet of Kerry Combs, and it was essentially a lynching, and get into that in a minute. Start the defensive line. Defensive line historically at Ohio State, last 7, 8, 10 years, been able to get unbelievable pressure. You had the Bosa's, Nick, and Joey rolling through. You had Chase Young after that. Those 3 guys are Pro Bowl caliber players. They're generational collegiate talents. It wouldn't surprise me if one of those guys wins a defensive MVP at some point in time, given the fact that Aaron Donald doesn't win it every year for the next decade. But all 3 of those guys, really, really good. So you had a game changer up front, and you had other guys who were talented around them. This defensive line has some talented players, but they don't necessarily have that guy that's the ultimate disruptor. We were hoping that Zach Harrison could be it, and maybe he still can be. He's just not quite there. Elite 5-star guy, tall, fast, has to continue to hone in on his skills, but the production hasn't been there yet. Has the 1 strip sack, but that's the only sack Ohio State has had over the last 2 games. You go inside, you got some good defensive tackles. Haskell Garrett, obviously the scoop and score against Minnesota that everyone remembered. But they've been getting pushed a little bit. There's been some movement off the line of scrimmage, especially against Oregon and a little bit against Minnesota. And so they haven't been quite as disruptive as what they've been in the past. And on top of that, when you're trying to be disrupted, you're going to avoid some things. You're going to give up some stuff. There's going to be gaps. You line up in your A gap, right in between the guard and the center. You've got to hold that. You get knocked out to the B, and all of a sudden now the linebacker's trying to figure out where to fit, and they begin to play slow. And it opens up other rush lanes. And that's been happening a little bit because guys have been trying to penetrate and they get scooped out. They're getting up the field, but they're behind the football. And so they're not causing that disruption and those hard cuts that everybody has been accustomed to seeing. You go to the second level, you start looking at the linebackers and what they're all about. Well, they've been playing slow. They've been playing a lot of guys. Al Washington, the linebacker, trying to figure out exactly who should be on the field. They got problems. They're trying to fix it. They're trying to stop some of the stuff in the run game. And so they've been working through a lot of guys. They've been playing slow, a little hesitant. A lot of guys were hurt in the spring. And so when that's the case, and even in the fall, you're trying to figure out how guys are working back from injury and who will be your best combination of guys out there and what you feel like you can ask guys to do. And that's not always an easy thing. It can be really difficult to try to pair up and match. Well, this guy's a good blitzer. This guy's good in the run game. He's good in coverage, and trying to compile that, to package it, to put these guys together and have them on the field at the right time can be hard, can be very, very difficult. And so that's something that, they're trying to battle. And that's something that they're trying to work on. So they've got that element that they're trying to develop. And so we talk about the running game. It's not just the first two layers, it's the back end as well. And we saw in Oregon, thing called the crack toss. Receiver comes down, bangs on the side of the linebacker. The corner has to immediately crack replace. Day one install of any football, high school, college, NFL, little league. You have to have a force player, an edge of your defense. You play a lot of man. You have some young, experienced corners who can't tell the difference between a block and necessarily a route. And these receivers sell it well. They're not filling fast enough. You have no edge to the defense. And then ultimately, you're able to get some big runs. So how do you fix that? Well, how do you solve these problems? Well, playing a little zone, I think, would obviously help that. It gives your corners, it takes a little heat off of them. They can play eyes back to the football, play faster, maybe a little easier that way. Can change up some of the zones that you play. You don't have to, structurally change who you are and what you're about, but that's a solution. And then on top of that, you've got to find a way to start bringing second and third level pressure to impact quarterbacks. Any quarterback now in college football, if you're going to give them time, they're going to be able to sit back there and pick you apart. And they did it on Saturday. And Oregon did a good job of it. Mario Cristobal wanted to come in, establish the run, did that, no pressure on passing downs, and was able to push the football down the field and have some success. So they had a very balanced attack and did a really good job of it. And so everyone looks at Kerry Combs and all the stuff that you see flying around, fire, carry, this and that. These are some of the things that Ryan Day said in his presser on Tuesday, talking about changes being made. What changes were made? I'd rather not get into the changes. I'm not going to tell you. I'm not going to tell you that's basically what he's saying. I'm not going to tell you what's out there. Everybody wants to fire somebody. Line he throws out. Let's not overreact, because he knows by firing someone and making massive wholesale changes after 2 games, it looks like it's panic and it's essentially punting on the season. You can't tell your players you have confidence in what you're doing if you're going to sit there and make these wholesale massive changes. All right. Let guys do their jobs. That's what he's basically been doing. He's an NFL guy. He is an executive head coach, runs the offense. I'm going to hire good guys and let them work on the defense. When I have to step in, I'll make my opinions known. If I tell them we need to make changes, here's what I'd like to see, but I'm going to let you do your job until it's to the point where I don't think you can do it anymore. And Ryan hasn't gotten to that point yet. And I don't think, frankly, it is to that point. It's not. There's still time to be able to change some things, but Ryan's the head coach and he has the ability to go out there and ask for these corrections to be made and then demand that they're made. And if, the coach doesn't want to do it, well, then that's when you begin to show him the door. But Kerry Combs is a smart guy. He's been coaching football for a long time. I believe he'll be able to figure that out, with Al Washington and the rest of the defensive staff. Asked about, did you talk to him? Well, was there uncomfortable conversations? Not necessarily uncomfortable, he was saying, but they're real. These are the issues. Whether it's structural, whether it's player-based, we've got to figure those things out. Philosophy-based. And then basically, he was pressed on whether Kerry is still the defensive coordinator. And he started laughing and saying yes. He wouldn't commit to him as to who's calling the plays this Saturday. But to me, that's a little more of an evidence that it might be more of a collaborative process. And it's not, frankly, for me to tell anybody who's going to be back there doing it. They're going to have a system. I'm going to approve the system and we'll see how it goes. And we'll see if it works. And ultimately falls back on the head coach. And so those are some of the things. But everybody wants, in the 21st century Twitter media, overreact. We want people's heads. That's not how sports operate. And it's not how they operate at a high level. Not if you want to try to win championships. Changes can be made after the season. Making changes in season in college sports rarely is going to lead to success, because it's not like the NFL where there's guys ready on staff to potentially be able to take over. And so those are some of the things that you're going to be battling, dealing with this. Kerry Combs, I think, will be fine. So Ohio State defense is not the most talented that it's been. There's not these elite guys there yet. Maybe some of them emerge, but they're not quite there yet. That's all right. It's all right. but you have to do some things schematically. You have to play together, and you can't have those mistakes and holes if you're trying to go out there and be able to have success. And so they can get that done, but those changes have to be implemented in practice. Now, the problem with it is you're probably not going to know how good you ultimately are until you play Penn State. You can fake it through a lot of these teams. And if you can't, then you're really in trouble. But the odds are through the Tulsas and the Akron and the early part of the Big Ten slate, you can fake it a little bit. It's not you play a team that's going to have some elite talent that is going to challenge you to where your athleticism and talent of your players isn't just going to overcome maybe their undisciplined nature or any scheme deficiencies. So you're not going to really know it until you probably play Penn State. And if you do know it, that means that it's really bad. So I don't think we're going to find anything out for a couple of weeks of how this thing goes. You can tell by the way they look and how they change and if they're on maybe the right path, but you're not going to know whether this thing's going to work. You know, it's like getting a shot, getting the vaccine, whatever it might be. You don't know if it's going to work. They're going to try this thing out. It's going to be tested until you're actually put in a situation where it has to be called upon and has to answer. You have to rely on it. That's the only way you're going to know, but it's not something that there's an immediacy to. So that's the tough part. You're not going to have an idea of how good it is until you really need to use it. You won't have to use it for quite some time. Now, with that being boxed up, because there's no one being fired this week at Ohio State. And if someone is fired in the next couple of weeks, it's because it was really bad. Now, USC, they did fire Clay Helton. They did fire their coach. In my opinion, I think they probably wanted to fire him last year. But he went 5-0 and then lost to Oregon in the conference championship game. So it's hard to fire a coach in a COVID-shortened season where it was mismanaged, you know, by the commissioners of the two conferences. They had the late start, you know, start, stop. You guys weren't working out. You have no idea what was going on. And so it was tough. So everybody was given a pass a little bit for the most part. And Clay Helton won all its games. It's tough to fire a coach who loses in the conference championship. But I don't think they wanted to keep him. And they were looking for a reason. And that reason was Saturday night when a Stanford team this isn't the Stanford team of early David Shaw or Jim Harbaugh, where they're coming in there, they're going to pound the football on you and they're going to be better. And they have, you know, Andrew Luck and elite quarterbacks, really, really talented tight ends, big physical offensive line, some elite skill guys, you know, and play a certain way. You knew the Stanford way of how they're going to do this. That wasn't that Stanford team, and they smoked you. I can't believe I stayed up on the East Coast to watch just about that whole thing because it was a beating. And you never felt like USC was truly ever in it once Stanford began to take control. So they get rid of Clay Helton. USC, outside of some little spurts where they've been good over the last decade, you know, Sam Darnold played well. I think Clay Helton, I think they had one conference championship, but you know, the Pac-12 isn't great as a conference. And so that's a pretty low threshold. They haven't been good really since Pete Carroll left. And so that's an issue that they're battling and something they're dealing with. And so they've got to find the right guy. Programs can go into a spiral. You're only one bad hire away from really putting your program up against it for your next hire. You hire a guy, probably because your program's not in great shape, give them 3 or 4 years to fix it. If they don't get it done, your next hire better be right because you're going to give that guy 2 to 3 to 4 years. And now you're almost a decade down the road. And that is what has happened with USC, where their talent is taken over at points, but now they're not even getting the quality of players. They were either that or they're not developing them the way that they need to be. They don't look like the USC players of old. Sure, some of them do, but they don't look like that across the board, either because they're not being recruited or they're not being developed. And maybe, and usually it's a combination of both. And so whoever they choose to bring in, they've got to get back to that. And I don't even know if USC is the best job in the Pac-12. Like Mario Cristobal's name's been thrown out there. I don't think it's a better job than Oregon. Not where he's at right now, not with what he's done to that. But the main guy that everybody is talking about, now a couple of them, but the one that resides in the state of Ohio, and Luke Fickell, he's down in Cincinnati right now. Obviously had a lot of success, won over 30 games the last 3 years. Really good team, knocking on the door of the college football playoff. Would he leave? In my opinion, I don't think he does. I don't think he leaves Cincinnati. I don't think he wants to live in Southern California. More importantly, I don't think his wife wants to go out there. I think there's a couple of jobs in the Midwest he would leave for, Notre Dame, Ohio State, maybe even a Penn State should James Franklin go. But I don't think he's interested in trekking all the way across the country for a rebuild, no matter how much they're paying him. Everybody's why is different. And Luke Fickell's why, after knowing the guy and playing for him, it's never been wholly financially motivated. He's got a great program. He's built something. He made reference to the grass isn't always greener. When someone tells you that, that means they don't really want to go and check out that other green grass. They know they have it pretty good where they're at. So I don't think Fick's going anywhere. Much to the chagrin, some of the USC faithful, their AD was the one that hired him at Cincinnati before leaving to go to USC. There are ties there, and I understand that. And maybe, heck, he ultimately goes. But as a betting man, if I was going to put money on this thing, I'm betting that Luke Fickell stays at Cincinnati. Now, James Franklin, does he potentially go? Southern California guy? Maybe. Depending how enticing the offer is. But I think he's got it rolling pretty good at Penn State. And if they can continue to support him in the way that he wants to be supported, I don't know if he leaves Penn State either. I'm curious to see PJ Fleck's another name they throw out. I think PJ would leave Minnesota. It's not Penn State. It's not an Ohio State in the Big Ten. He's done a lot of good things there. You have to strike sometimes while the iron's hot, and you wonder how much longer it's going to be warm for PJ Fleck, where he'll have this cachet around his name to get a big payday and go to a big blue blood power program. One of the historically good programs in college football. You get a chance to bite at that. For a lot of people, that's going to make a big difference. And so I think PJ Fleck would potentially take that job. I think he would take it if he was offered it. So he's one guy. Eric Bieniemy, they're throwing out there, USC guy. I don't know if he wants to go back to college football. If he does, I think that he would be right near the short list of being able to get in. But I don't think it's the greatest job in the world. It should be. It could be. It's in Southern California. Has a lot of recruiting base. But there have been schools, the Bamas, the Clemsons, the Ohio States, Texas, Georgia, they've been going in and poaching guys and pulling them out of there. So the fertile Southern California recruiting ground, it has been picked. It gets picked over now. It's not like it was locked down like it was with Pete Carroll back in the late 90s and early 2000s. So there's a lot there to digest, trying to figure out exactly where these things go and how they all square away with the coaches, because you got an interim, but they're going to hire someone at the end of the season. They probably already have in their mind who it's going to be, or at least they're working through the list of candidates. Don't think it's Fickell. Don't think anybody's fired at Ohio State, at least not yet. Things would have to get progressively worse before that happens. And I think they will improve. History tells me that when you have competent coaches that know what they're doing and pretty talented players, you can get things corrected if you really want to. And I think that they will. And they'll change some stuff up and work to their personnel a little better. And all those things will begin to swirl. So this is what we'll be doing each and every week. In this in Carp's Corner, pretty excited to bring this to you guys. New little venture with OutKick. It's going to be a lot of fun. So thanks for listening.